prove it.
All right, so I want to hear that one more time. So how many people have enjoyed a superhero homecoming? That was the correct response. Thank you very much. All right. So, without further ado, I want to introduce our interviewers and then our stars for our last panel here this evening. I am very tired, so I am going to read off my phone. So, Vera Camden is Professor Emerita of English at Penn State University, Clinical Assistant Professor of Psychiatry at Case Western University, and Training and Supervising Analyst at the Cleveland Psychoanalytic Center. She is American Editor of the Journal of Graphic Novels and Comics. Please welcome Vera Camden. Valentino Zullo, who I personally like to refer to as Dr. Zullo because it sounds like a comic book villain. Valentino Zullo is Assistant Professor of English and Co-Director of the Rust Belt Humanities Lab at Erskine College. He has been a co-organizer of the Get Graphic program at Cleveland Public Library since 2014. Let's hear it for the Get Graphic Comics discussions at Cleveland Public Library. And he is also the Ohio Center for the Book Scholar in Residence. He is Associate Editor of the Journal of Graphic Novels and Comics. And do I understand that this could very well be written up as an article in the journal in the future date? Could very well be. So you're all like article adjacent. All right. Our comics creators for this evening are Andrew Aydin. He is the he is the New York Times bestselling author and recipient of the National Book Award, among other honors and distinctions. Andrew is the creator and co-author of the graphic memoir series March and Run, which chronicled the life and civil rights icon Congressman John Lewis. So he co-authored that with Representative Lewis. March was the first comics work to win the National Book Award. Let's hear it for that. I'm just going to be your hype man for this whole time. So he's an Atlanta native. Andrew served on the staff of Representative Lewis from 2007 until the passing of the congressman in 2020. He recently launched a Kickstarter for the Appalachia Comics Project. He is currently writing Taste of Justice for DC Comics and Fusky with Chef Sally Ann Robinson for 10 Speed Graphic. Let's give it up for Andrew Aydin. All right. Luen is a New York Times bestselling author. He started telling stories through comics. He wanted to explore themes that have fascinated him since he was a kid, with identity, culture, and belonging. Since then, Gene has published with industry giants, including First Second Books, DC, and Marvel. Ooh, the streams have crossed. His works include Superman Smashes the Klan. Let's hear it for Superman Smashes the Klan. Superman, Action Comics, American-born Chinese, and he most recently published Lunar New Year Love Story, which has been nominated for an Eisner Award. Thank you very much. And in 2016, the U.S. Library of Congress named him Ambassador for Young People's Literature, which is a very cool thing. And that year, he became the third graphic novelist to win a MacArthur Fellowship. And I believe that's known as the Genius Grant, I'm going to say. Just saying. So we have a genius in our midst, a certified genius in our midst. So ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Andrew Aydin, Gene Luen, Vera Camden, and Valentino Zullo.
Thank you, Don. Let's get started. This is very exciting. Thank you all for being here. This is so fun to celebrate Superman in Cleveland. All right, well, that is our first question. About Superman and being here in Cleveland. So we're in Cleveland, where the superhero was born nearly 90 years ago. Can we start by asking you to tell us about what Superman means to you, and what does it mean to steward his legacy today? And you can play rock, paper, scissors if you want.
Oh man, Superman means so many things, right? Like, that's kind of the beauty, is Superman's a character that you can find elements of yourself in so many different ways. For me, I started reading DC Comics first because they were on the newsstand. right? The old spinner rack. Like, how many of us wish we had a spinner rack in our house, right? Right? And it was post Death of Superman. Like, I was a little too young for Death of Superman. It was like that was a wall book by the time I got to read it. But it was in the era of all the different versions of Superman, right? The Eradicator, Superboy, Steel, Cyborg, all that. And that's kind of what I loved about it, right? Is that Superman was a prism through which we could look at ourselves. And so to me, if you boil it down to one thing, Superman is fundamentally about hope, and it's all finding hope.
Yeah, I agree with Andrew. I think Superman really is about hope. I do have to confess, though, that when I was a kid, I was not a Superman fan. I remember Superman is the very first comic in my collection was a Superman comic. It was DC Comics Presents number 57. It starts Superman and the Atomic Knights. I did not buy that because I wanted it. I bought that because my mom made me buy it. Like we went to our local bookstore. I saw on the spin rack a copy of Marvel 2-in-1 starring The Thing and Rom the Space Knight. I was a 5th grader and I thought, like, Rom the Space Knight and The Thing are so much cooler than Superman, right? But my mom saw that cover and she thought The Thing and Rom the Space Knight looked really scary. And she was worried that they were going to give me nightmares. So she made me buy this Superman comic instead. Because Superman is, of course, like every parent's favorite superhero. Like he's like a big flying Boy Scout who never does anything wrong, you know? And when I was a kid, I just thought he was really boring. It wasn't until I got older that I really like developed an attachment to him. First, because he's the first superhero, so I feel like if you like superheroes, you have to like Superman. And second, I realized like there's a reason for his boringness. You know, I think so. My own interpretation of Superman is that he's boring in the same way my parents are boring. Like my parents are immigrants. You know, they came from Asia, and after they got here, they got like steady 9-to-5 jobs. They tried to keep their heads down. They tried to follow all the rules. And it wasn't until I became an adult that I realized, oh, they're doing that because they don't want anybody to question whether they belong here or not. And I think that's the same for Superman. Superman came here. I think deep down inside he knows he's not from here. He knows he's different. And one of the reasons why he follows the rules, he presents himself the way he does, is because he doesn't want anyone to question his citizenship. He doesn't want anyone to question whether he belongs here or not, or he's contributing, just like my parents. So when I made that connection, I felt like I developed like a heart attachment to him. And now he's like, I mean, he's the best one, right? Out of all the superheroes, now he's the best one.
That's a lovely segue into the next question we have for you all is, you know, Superman as a sort of mythic hero is one of our great American myths, really, in so many ways, including sort of, you know, an openness to coming into a new world. But we're wondering how you decide to make him your own, as it were, to take a new perspective, to take a new direction. You know, how do you, as we put it, how do you decide a different route to inject new life into this character, particularly if folks are often attached, right, to the Superman of their youth, or the Superman that they first, but then now you're going to, in a sense, give them a new dimension. So we just thought perhaps you could, you know, just chat a little bit about how do you do it, you know, how do you reckon with that history, but also the new face?
Well, so I think with a character like Superman, who's been around for so long, he's gone through these different eras. His powers change, even his personality will change, you know, from decade to decade. And one of the things that I did early on when I signed on to do Superman was I looked at the different eras of his character and I tried to find the ones that kind of resonated with me the most and the things that I cared about the most. I do have to say though, you know, the DC universe is like this living universe. So when you enter it and you start writing in it, you don't always have full control over what you're writing because the universe itself kind of sometimes like sets these boundaries for you. So one of the things that happened in my run, like I first signed to do Superman in 2015, and I did 10 issues of the main Superman title. So at that point, it was an era called the New 52. It's like part of the lore of the DC universe. And Superman was really different. Like he lost his powers. He and Lois were not a thing. He was actually dating Wonder Woman at the time, you know. And all of these pieces were not for me. They were just the way the universe was going at the time. And I remember I'm a Clovis shipper, I have to say. So that particular part was hard for me to navigate. And then I would get all these like emails about it, you know, about how like the fact that Superman was dating Wonder Woman like ruined love, you know. So there are things like that you have to deal with. But I do think that even despite the restrictions that the DC universe might put on you, he's a flexible enough character that you can still find a piece of him that overlaps with your own concerns.
Is this why you did Lunar New Year Love Story?
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I had to get all that like Clovis energy and put it somewhere. Yeah.
So my Superman experience is a little different. I haven't written in the main universe. I've written the Superman in like PSAs, like the Rock the Vote PSA, which is very easy, right? Superman voting good, right? And then now I'm writing him in Taste of Justice, which is, I'd say this with no pun intended, like a pocket universe. If you've seen the movie, you'll get that. It's because it's about food, right? Like Superman's been around for 80 years, and I mean, I think the times in which she's been engaged with food has been tangential at best. And I want to center food as the key element of the story and then expand from there with the other parts of it, right? And so it's been interesting to go through and research where food has shown up in Superman lore. So like it's canon that Superman's favorite meal is beef bourguignon.
Wow.
Right? It was made canon in the late 50s. Clearly Julia Child got in someone's ear. Right? I mean, and so, okay, well that was where we started the series. We were like, Superman likes beef bourguignon. Where's the conflict? And they were like, well, I don't know if Lois knows how to cook that. Right? She's a busy, professional, strong woman. Probably didn't have time for French cooking lessons. And so that's been the fun part, is finding where you get to intersect with the living universe and the history and the things that were made canon. And then from there, because food was never the center of it, you get to center it and then find your own vehicle for exploration.
So this is clearly a prelude to a restaurant that you'll be opening up, featuring all these favorite recipes.
DC's already got the rights.
No, I know, but it's a brilliant idea. I mean, I can see it coming right now. And you'll have, what is it, breakfast for dinner, right? Great name for the restaurant, yeah. Breakfast for dinner. You heard it here first.
I love that. So one of the things we want to talk about, because Cleveland is so important to this film, and is thinking about, this is a story about a place, a Superman story, obviously, about a place, about losing it and finding a new place in the U.S. And we were thinking, how do you think about that sense of place in these stories, and how does Superman find it for you? And also, you know, and I think you are both writing about a place right now. We're going to hint at something that's going to come later. We're writing about a specific place in the U.S., so you're thinking about place a lot, Appalachia, obviously. So how does place play a part in your Superman stories?
Okay, there's two elements to this. One's going to seem tangential. The element about place as reflective of home, right? Because it's a theme they go back to over and over again. And what is your home? My father left when I was very young. I never knew him, and by all accounts from my mother, he was not a great man. And the elements, especially in the movie, of your lineage does not determine your future, was so meaningful to me. Of like, this is something you're perpetually outrunning. I mean, I've said it in speeches where like I carry the name of a man I did not know, and yet that's the name that's on every book I write. And the idea that we can reclaim that, and then we can reinvent it, and then we can make our own home, we can make our own set of values based on the people that we choose to be with and the people we choose to be. That was Like I'm surrounded by all these like colleagues, and I was like, don't cry. But it was really heartfelt. And then the second part about like actually the place, right? I mentioned this last night. My great aunt and uncle ran a theater about 3 blocks down the street from here, and it was very meaningful about Cleveland to have these realizations. Like I didn't know until you figured it out, right? And then all of a sudden you realize that you're treading in the same streets that your family on the other side, right? The other part of me that I did not know also, it was treading 100 years ago. And finding that home, and then realizing that sometimes you don't know that you're going home. You don't know that you're coming back to a place where you and your family have had memories and success and love, and you just find yourself there.
You said that was your mother's hero, right?
Yeah,
Your aunt,
actually,
so
the
it's
company
something-
that we made to hold all the rights is literally called Aunt Lou.
Yeah.
Yeah, Aunt Lou. She was a Spitfire. My mother, she was like her idol, because she was a woman who, like, she traveled on the road with the circus, and this is in the 1890s, like not exactly common. Imagine that, right? And I'm like, in my head, she was always driving a stagecoach, you know. And so, this was, especially having lost my mom, that was like, oh, Mom, you're still here, you know.
We're very happy to have brought you to Cleveland because in April was your first time here, so we're happy that we made that happen and you found that history out.
You know how to show me a good time. This is an amazing town. Also, holy cow, do you guys have a lot of comic stores? I'm so jealous.
I completely agree with Andrew. The theme of place and of home is just so connected to the core of who Superman is. The book from DC that I'm probably most well known for is Superman Smashes a Klan. It's part of their YA line, and that book is an adaptation of a very famous storyline from the 1940s Superman radio show. So in 1946, at the end of World War II, the writers of the Superman radio show, they had the most popular radio show in all of America. He'd been fighting Nazis all the way through the war. Now that the Nazis were defeated in real life, this writer's room was trying to decide who he should fight next. And they decided that the biggest threat to peace in post-war America was the Ku Klux Klan. So they created a 16-episode series where the Man of Steel took on the Ku Klux Klan in defense of actually a Chinese-American family that had moved into Metropolis. And that storyline you can find on YouTube, the whole thing. Just do a search for Clan of the Fiery Cross Superman, it'll pop right up. And I have to say, despite the fact that it's from the 1940s, large chunks of it still hold up. And it really is about this Chinese-American family trying to find a home in this brand new city. And then Superman, this immigrant from another planet, coming in to defend them. So in our adaptation, I worked with an amazing art team out of Japan called Greek Hero. They did the Avatar: The Last Airbender comics with me, if you're a fan of Avatar. Stunning artists. But in our adaptation, we try to double down on that idea about both Superman and about this Chinese American family. Like the whole story is about how they find a home, how they find a place for themselves in Metropolis.
Yeah, I was very struck by last night when Philip Johnson talked about how meaningful the story of the family, what family is the true family, if you will, or at least the family that he most identifies with, is so moving, and it does remind me of what you were saying earlier. It's really an amazing association. And Valentino and I both are in psychoanalysis, in the practice of psychoanalysis, and one of the folks that we admire most is Erik Erikson, who did not know his father, but he had a stepfather who was quite alienated from, who was named Hamburger. So he renamed himself after his analysis, Erik Erikson, Erik, son of Erik, that he had made his own father, as it were, within himself. So I recommend that book to you. There's many books, actually, many books. But we were wanting to sort of switch gears a little bit and talk about, comics making, the making of comics, the field of comics, the sort of the ancient the ancient practice of comics. I mean, particularly within, the Chinese culture in a way. I mean, the very pictogram. I mean, it's fascinating. The relationship between the hand and the eye and so on. And just what is your comics, experience? How did you get into comics? What did you decide that you could actually start, penning and creating on your own? Yeah.
Well, that Superman comic that I bought when I was a 5th grader, that was actually the beginning. I'd always been interested in stories. I grew up in a house full of stories. Both my parents were avid storytellers, and my brother and I loved listening to their stories. I also grew up drawing. So in the beginning, when I was very young, I remember watching cartoons on television and realizing that those were drawings that were telling me a story. So that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be an animator. And then in 5th grade, when I got that Superman comic, I realized that this is another way to tell stories through drawing. And it's better. It's actually better than animation, because I remember being a kid and not being able to figure out how to get my drawings on that screen. But the comics, those were just drawings on paper, and I knew how to do that. So pretty soon after that, I started self-publishing my own comics, and that's how I got into it.
It's all John Lewis's fault, really. I grew up reading comics. I'll never forget going to comic conventions when I was like 12 and 13, and just, you grow up poor and you're like, these guys are making a living with what they're putting on a piece of paper and then selling, right? It was just amazing to me, right? When I'm mowing lawns and sweating all summer in the Georgia heat and everything, just to, and they were so kind. One of the most influential, the biggest moment for me was meeting Mike Wieringo for the first time, who was doing the Flash run at that. And that was one of the first series I was buying off the newsstands. And I'm, being a nerd and ran out of things to say. And he could tell I was just not wanting to leave. And he did this beautiful Flash sketch for me on the backer board. And I still have that framed on my wall today, in my office. And at the same time, I grew up, my mom's like, you gotta get a job, right? You need health insurance. You're not a very good artist. She was very honest. And so I enjoyed them, I read them, but the writing that I got to do was all, speeches, scripts for radio ads, or not sexy things, not fun things. Important things in some parts, but not anything creative. And it was never an opportunity. It was just never something that seemed like was open to me. Because you needed to break in is not easy, right? I mean, it takes a moat in a lot of cases, right? And we just didn't have it. And it wasn't until I started working for Congressman Lewis and I saw this problem that he had of, you need to tell your story, sir. You can't keep doing the same documentary 17 times. You've got to change your MO. And then I could convince him to get on the internet, which, mixed success on that overall. But he was so fascinated with direct communication. And so I was learning to write his letters, I was writing the tweets and the Facebook posts and all sort of stuff. And that was so similar. It's sequential narrative at its core, right? So it wasn't much of a leap. And then I'm like, Congressman, you should write a comic book. And he's like, yeah, okay. He actually told a reporter later when they asked him, what did you think when he first asked that? He said, I thought the young man had lost his mind. But I was this is the other side of it, right? This is my mother coming out. I was like, no, this is your answer. I was so persistent. And the John Lewis that you don't know is the John Lewis who, if it's your idea, if it's your thing, he will do it, but he will do it with you. You have to step up. And that it was the truest form of mentorship he ever had for people. Was he got so many people who offered him ideas, right? It was his kindest gesture, but also his honest gesture to say, what he did to me, I'll do it, but only if you write it with me. And that was what changed my life. I mean, I never even thought, when I was suggesting it, I never thought I would be the one to write it. It was just you should do this, not understanding that, congressional staffs are much smaller than you think, they have much less resources than you think, and they're a little bit amateurish, which you probably do think. And that's where it all started. And then, the truth of it is, it was 5 years from that yes to actually getting a book out. It was all 2.5, almost 3 years to getting even a publisher to say yes. And even then, it was a publisher so small that it had 4 people in it, including the warehouse guy, right? Because all the big ones said no. And I guess, when people ask me, like, how do I do this? And I'm like, you have to be so dogged and so persistent. You could literally be bringing John Lewis into the room, and yet you will walk out with a no. That you can't let anybody else determine the worth and the value of the story you want to tell if you believe in it. And you just have to keep doing it, and then first and foremost, you just have to start. Because ultimately, March only got published because I wrote the first book on spec. And that's really where it is, where like, there's not going to be somebody who comes in with that big advance. There's not going to be somebody who comes in and taps you on the shoulder. You got to do it, you got to prove it, and then you got to do it 4 or 5 more times before you actually get to do it for a living.
It's such a, this book, March, is such a brilliant, it's a 3-volume book on John Lewis, and it's a stunning production, really it is. And, one of the things that I was thinking as I took a look at it again, in more depth, was how, not unlike Art Spiegelman, putting a very serious, heartbreaking and other, socially imperative kind of story into the form of comics, and how for that generation, comics was something that was degraded. I mean, most of you know this, but some may not, that there was a time when comics was a very, sort of perceived as a very corrupting form, a very degraded form. And so the audacity of putting one of the most timely, urgent questions of history, whether the Holocaust or civil rights movement, into the form of comics is audacious. And I would think even within John Lewis, there'd be a bit of a resistance, because that generation, they would turn away from comics. They were a degraded form. So now we have this elevation to historical mythic narrative, and including, I think, even the Klan book as well. It's taking a momentous subject.
Well, there was a lot of resistance in even John Lewis land to him doing it, right? And that's the thing where it's like, I can't imagine what it was like when American Born Chinese came out, right? I mean, we couldn't have won the National Award if you hadn't been a finalist first, right? Like, you paved the way. Right? I actually showed the congressman American Born Chinese, like, see, this could work, And I think that's it. We're constantly having to justify ourselves, but at the same time, I think what it really exposes is how underutilized comics are as a medium. We can be using comics to teach. We can be using comics to explore emotional situations. It's not just about superheroes, but that's what Superman unlocks, right? He unlocks that for us to be able to follow the Will Eisner path, where he made plane repair manuals for the Army during World War II, right? And then fast forward to what we're doing now. Like, this is what I love about the webtoons, where I think the scrolling vertical format unlocks a whole new avenue to teach people things. Right? And as March taught me about the history of the civil rights movement, we just published Comics of the Movement, which reprints the SNCC comics from Lowndes County in 1966, which instructed some of the earliest black voters, first-time voters after the signing of the Voting Rights Act, how to vote, and also what their elected officials just do. Right? I mean, like, there's stuff in there, like, I didn't know, like, the coroner becomes the sheriff if the sheriff leaves the county. Right? And it's like, these are things where they get forgotten by history. In fact, in some ways, it predates what we think of as the zine and indie comic movie movement of the late 60s, right? These were very simple, very crude, right? And we may continue to have to justify making these works, but over time, I think what we're really setting up is that comics will become the default medium for teaching. And for teaching not just how to do things, but for teaching empathy and love and emotional understanding.
In point of fact, psychologically, even neurologically, there's something about, as I was saying earlier, the handling on that there's a shift that takes place with the creation of the image. This, of course, applies to all art, all visual art, but there's a but comics brings it to everyone. Or sort of Linda Barry's notion that you sort of pick up with comics where you left off, whatever year, 6 years, 7 years old, or whatever. So it does, I think, bring empathy in a very special way.
I think to that point, I think there's a lot of comics fans here, a lot of people who want to be creators, and are thinking about telling their stories, and are they going to tell a memoir or superhero? And you've done both. And can you talk about sort of navigating how you tell stories within these different genres, and probably in some ways how you don't make such great distinctions as people outside of these genres do, right? Can you talk about sort of the making comics in that way?
I think you can think of the modern American comic book market as divided in two, right? There's the monthly, mostly superhero market, and that's like, you associate that with comic book shops and that sort of thing. And then there's this graphic novel market that has kind of risen out of the traditional book market, like the way graphic novelists work, the way their contracts work and everything. It looks a lot more like a traditional novelist. But that's really heavily also influenced by these old school underground comics. You know, so when you're talking about like autobio comics, most of that stuff is actually happening in this space that grew out of like the graphic novels. And I think in terms of pure comics, it's all kind of the same thing. It's all telling stories through static sequential art. But the form in which it comes into the world is different. Like with these monthly comics, they're almost always 20 or 22 page segments. And then with the graphic novels, there's generally no page limit. You could just go as long or as short as you need. So the approaches are both very different. Like, I have to say, like, I started on this side. I started on the graphic novel side. And when I moved to monthly comics, it was like a really hard transition. I'm not Brian Michael Bendis. I don't, like, I can't, it was like so hard for me to figure out how to think like that, how to think in 22 page chunks, you know? And it took me a really long time to get the hang of it. Even now, I don't feel like that's my native way of doing comics. But so for you, I think, even beyond genre, I think it's important to get to know yourself as a storyteller. Are you the kind of storyteller that naturally breaks your stories up into chunks? If you are, I think doing pamphlet comics, doing monthly comics might be a good fit for you. And if you're not, if you're the kind of storyteller that needs to just let the story go as long as it can or it needs to, then you might fit a little bit better on this side.
But I think there's also an element of, do you need deadline pressure to get the story done, right? Because actually the first time, really one of only 2 times I've ever had the opportunity before this weekend to meet Brian, was at the 2001 Atlanta Comic Con, where I was 17 years old, a little comic ready to get signed, and he's frantically typing out an Ultimate Spider-Man script at the table. And he's like, hold on! You know, and I'm like, that seems really hard. I mean, dude, it's like Saturday. Right? I mean, and I think that's like, we have this luxury when we're doing graphic novels. Like, I'm 4 years deep on one right now, where you, it's really hard to tell people that day you spent staring into the woods was really productive. Because you're thinking, right? Like, I can't tell you, like, oh, that was a good thought. Man, that was really, yeah. Right? But you need that, especially like when you're distilling like a giant narrative, when you're going 200, 300, 400 pages deep into a story, you're bringing all these threads. You need that time, right?
Yeah, writing in a lot of ways is a really terrible job. Like, you can spend all day, I've done this, I spent all day writing, you know, I'll write 10 pages, and then I'll feel really good about it, and then I go to sleep, and when I wake up, I realize why those 10 pages were terrible, and I have to throw them away, right? Like that kind of stuff happens all the time. And I do think your point about deadlines is right. Like, some people actually, like, there's some members that just can't produce unless they have the deadline. They need the deadline to produce, right? And that was the thing that took me so long to get used to in the monthly superhero world, is those deadlines. I remember my graphic novel editor, we were having a conversation once, because I was really like freaked out about a deadline. And he told me this, that I never recovered from. He said, you know, in the novel world, deadlines are more of a suggestion. And after that, I never met another deadline for him ever again, you know? Whereas my DC editor is like, no, the deadline is not a suggestion. Yeah, you'll get fired, right? You'll get fired.
They will find you.
Yeah.
No, well, and you know, there's another piece of this too, right? Even when we're writing these memoirs and the nonfiction books, the structure of storytelling is the same, right? I mean, March is essentially Star Wars, right? It's the boy from the country goes to the city, meets the wizard with the special powers. Yeah, no one's ever called Dr. King that. But it is, right? And he teaches him about nonviolence. And then he's like, okay, and then they go destroy the Death Star for the first time, which is segregation in Nashville. And then the second one, it starts off, it's just empire, right? It's the beginning, it's like, you know, the bombings and the start leading into the Freedom Rides. Freedom Rides is its own separate narrative, it's Hoth. And then, you know, John Lewis is away from the Freedom Rides because he's on Dagobah, and then he misses the end of the Freedom Rides, but he comes back just in time to rescue his friends. And then, you know, you go into the second act, which is the March Hall. Anyway, you get the full read it, you see it, right? It's Star Wars, Empire, it's the exact same structure. And I think that was, Nate and I even both, Nate's the artist on March, we didn't start talking about that until halfway through the second book when we realized it, right? And we were like, oh my God, it's Black Star Wars, right? And I remember like teasing John Lewis, and I was like, help me, Obi-Wan, like, you know, and he didn't get it. But then it's also Lord of the Rings, right? Like Nate and I for book 3, there's a scene that just goes on. It's 12 pages of talking, and I'm sorry, but that's how you have to explain the Freedom Summer, because you have to explain all of the thought and argument and debate that went into it. And so when Nate and I were working on it, that script section became known as the Council of Elrond, right? This long, talky explanation section, right? And those universal storytelling, some people call them tropes or structures, really to me come down to how we understand the world, right? Whether it's fiction or nonfiction, these are how we see the world. They talk about the 7 different types of stories or other frames for it, but you know, we see the world as our brains are made to see it, in an organic, human way. And that's what connects it all.
Which brings us to y'all, both of y'all's.
Yeah, let's use more y'alls here, right?
I have to pay some tribute to my Virginia.
Yeah.
But it's a better plural than you guys, in my estimation. In my estimation, speaking as a feminist. But in any event, you know, your work now on the Appalachian Project and speaking of storytelling, right? Yeah. And the rich legacy of that area, place, and time, and just to have you all speak a little bit about that, and especially I was thinking about the deep narrative history of that region, both in song and lyricism, as well, poetry, if you will, as well as, you know, the actual stories, the mythic quality of that region. And I wondered if that's the direction that you'll take, or just to speak more widely about how the two of you are working together on this really exciting new project.
Well, Andrew's the boss on this one. It's his baby.
But you're still part of it.
Yeah, I mean, Gene, you were the first person I called, right? So I read this graduate thesis because if you've read mine about the history of Martin Luther King and the Montgomery story, it's been foundational in my own life and work. And so I always have believed that sometimes the best ideas are put out in people's graduate thesis. Yeah, it's like the nerdiest answers. But I read this thesis by a woman named Elon Justice, who's from Kentucky. And she wrote it for the MIT Media Lab on depictions of Appalachia in the media. And essentially the thesis is that the reason Appalachia has been able to be exploited for the last 200 years is because they've never been able to control their own narrative. Wow. And then her solution was that if you just start plucking random people from Appalachia and put them in Hollywood writing rooms or in New York publishing, they're not going to have the support system they need to succeed. So she suggests, and we've seen this exact same problem in the Black community, right? It was exactly the same problem early on. And so she proposes a co-authorship model. And when I read that, I was like, hey, I know something about that. And I started thinking about, this all comes out of Helene, right? I live in a town called Eddyville, North Carolina. It's where I moved to after Congressman Lewis passed. It was where my mother lived. I live on her old farm, and I moved there to heal. I became a farmer. When you lose everybody, it's working the land is pretty much the only thing that will save you, right? Getting your hands dirty, learning to fix your own tractor. It's how you get a sense of being able to be back in control of your world. And so we got hit incredibly hard by Helene. I lost neighbors. I was trapped without communication or the ability to leave anywhere for almost a week. But I also witnessed FEMA come in and do some extraordinary work, the state National Guard, the local officials. We pulled together, there was no chain of command. It was a wild experience that has never quite been repeated. This is a region the size of Connecticut that was cut off from the outside world, completely. No communications, no roads in. That's why they kept having to use the helicopters. So I read this thesis, I've gone through this crazy thing, and I've witnessed some really beautiful expressions of care, right? It gets thought of as this region of you know, the Hatfields and the McCoys. I actually got to meet the Hatfields at a Comic-Con. They're not mad at each other anymore, I learned. And I saw people help people in a way that no one asked who you voted for, no one asked, you know, no one cared what your race was. No, I mean, it was extraordinary. And in some ways, I think all of us in the region are looking back on it with almost like a longing. How do we get back to that? Put all that in the blender, and I called Gene. And I said, okay, I got this idea. Do you think it's crazy? You're the only genius I know. And he, you know, I explained it. I was like, look, what if we start finding first stories to tell from that disaster so that we can create a model of understanding for these disasters, because we're seeing it happen now over and over and over across the country, right? So we need to know what that's like so that we're all ready to survive, right? And we even got Dr. David Easterling, who was the NOAA climate science officer at the Asheville office. He's writing a story. I paired him with Nate. I was like, you got this, buddy. To explain the science behind these storms, right? And so we're putting all this, and Gene's like, this is not bad. And once I had Gene not thinking it was a terrible idea, I went around and I went to my partners at Good Trouble Comics, and then Matt Fraction begged, Lauren begged Brian, and Brian jumped on board. He's been a tremendous support, both for fundraising and as a co-writer of one of the stories. I can't wait to see the wedding story come out. I read your outline too, man. It's really good. And now we're trying to put together this book. It's called Islands in the Sky. And it's called Islands in the Sky because the first voice I heard after 3 days, right? There's nothing scarier after a disaster than turning on your radio and dialing all the way through the spectrum and not being able to get a single channel. Like, you've seen that movie, The Zombies Come Next. Right? It was terrifying. And it was on the third day of just scrolling endlessly, I finally get a signal. And it's from a church on the top of one of the mountains near me. And he says, you know, he's reading out the list of the missing. And he says, you know, we are known as the land of sky, because that's what Western North Carolina's regional, that's how they refer to themselves, the land of sky. But tonight we are all islands in the sky until these waters recede. And that's where the name came from. And then it became this project. And now we've got 12 chapters with Vera Koch and Nate Powell, June Kim. I mean, just all these amazing creators who've signed on. Matt Fraction's writing one. And it's like there's never been a book that I've seen that didn't have superheroes in it that had this much comics talent on it. It's really incredible. And I'm just so grateful that if I send up my flag, and I try never to send up my flag unless it's really needed, that these kind of people step up. And so we're actually like $3,000 short. So if you guys could like check AppalachianComics.org, like right now, really, like pull out your phone. You can spend 30 minutes talking to Brian. You can get signed books from everybody. You can get art. Val Delandro, who did Bitch Planet with Kelly Sue and just did the Mr. Terrific. He's doing the current Mr. Terrific series. He'll do a commission. All these sort of things. And it's on Kickstarter. The link is right at the top of AppalachianComics.org. AppalachiA Comics, COMICS.org.
It's a Kickstarter, and there's postcards around here somewhere. They were at one of the tables, unless they got rained on, which would be symbolic.
Yeah, right?
But there are postcards around here somewhere. We'll find them for you. They'll be at Andrew's table when you get your book signed.
Yes, that's right. And I'll just say this one last piece, and then we get back to the Superman. The thing is, when we look at the problems in our country right now, so much of the anger comes from people feeling like they have not been heard. And Appalachia is at the core of that. And if we can build a model for giving voice to the voiceless, we can bridge these gaps and rebuild the social fabric of this country. And I have never believed more strongly that comics is the medium that can accomplish that.
I think comics from the very beginning has been an outsider's medium. So this project is like it's just so comics. It's so appropriate for it to be comics, right? Comics is where poor Jewish kids from New York were able to find a voice, or cultural and minorities or LGBTQ communities. Anybody who has not been able to get through gatekeepers, they can go through comics because there aren't really any gatekeepers in comics. So this just kind of fits in with the history of what the medium is and how the medium serves the culture.
And they love comics there. I mean, there's a reason Mike bought my first comic in Western North Carolina at the Piggly Wiggly, which actually later became one of the FEMA sites. Yeah. It was eerie seeing that. But I mean, if anybody's read Demon Copperhead, Barbara Kingsolver writes extensively and won the Pulitzer Prize for a book about a character from Appalachia who makes comics about Appalachia. Right? I mean, this is giving this is our chance to we write about heroes. But these creators who are signing on to this, you, Brian, everybody else, you guys are being heroes for these people. You should have seen when we had our kickoff event, one of the survivors came up to me and cried because she was so excited to be working with someone that she'd read her whole life. Like, this is giving them hope. And that's what we can do, and it's I'm just so grateful to you guys. Like, thank you. Thank you.
Please, let's go back to Superman.
Yeah.
So we should start with Q&A with the audience, but really quickly, I have one last thing I want to know, and it's a two-part question. I'm just going to put two things together. What is your favorite Superman story? What's your favorite thing you're reading right now that we should all read?
I personally really like Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. From Alan Moore.
Dang it, man.
I just thought, man,
Like, what would pass it around?
I read about it.
Yeah.
I read about it, that he was just going to tie everything up, and he had, 30 pages to do it or something? He's like, how's that guy going to do that? And he totally did it. He totally did it. He nailed everything you had to nail, he nailed.
Yeah.
So I think that might be my favorite.
Still Save for the Man Who Has Everything. That's the other one that's as good.
Oh yeah, right. The annual story. Yeah. No, that's legendary. It's also, and that one's an interesting example of where you're like, Alan really didn't like Batman. You know what I mean? Like Batman's like stilted in that, and then Superman he brings it back, and then it was really interesting to read that in the ramp up to this. I mean, I think everybody you got to read For All Seasons. That's just an absolute classic. I actually am going to go a different way. I believe it was Superman 30. It is the first appearance of Mr. Mitzelplitz. That's the only Golden Age issue I own because I find that, I don't know why, he's just so eccentric. I love it. And I've never gotten a yes to a story I pitched with him. So I hope someday, that's what I want to do, the YA Mr. Mitzelplitz. Yeah, that'll be fun. And then there was this. What are we reading now?
What are you reading right now that we should read? Like, what comic are you reading right now that we should read? Like, what?
I'm really enjoying the Absolute Martian Manhunter.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Dennis Camp. Yeah. And everything Dennis Camp is doing is amazing. Also, that Image series that I cannot remember the name to right now.
20th Century Men.
20th Century Men, but the other one, the one that's coming out right now.
Crisis.
Yes, Assorted Crisis Events. Yeah, sorry to take over. Yes, I love Dennis Camp so much.
Oh yeah, that's the best part about our conversations. I like that comic, and you're like the freaking Amazon of it, where you're like, if you like this, and I'm taking notes, oh yeah, I'll read that. Yeah. It's I don't get a chance to read a lot of comics anymore, right? You're just on deadline all the time, and then you're reading something that's for reference, and it's how did Superman make beef bourgeois or whatever in 1969, and oh right, because you did bourgeois and Bourguignon. I'm doing great, guys.
Well, I'm a big Jeff Lemire fan. I think Phantom Road is amazing from Image Comics. And then in terms of graphic novels, if you want another story about somebody from far away making a home for themselves here, there's a book called Family Style by Tin Pham. He's a good friend of mine. I like his book though, even if he was not a good friend of mine. But it's about, instead of coming from Krypton, it's about a family coming from Vietnam and making a place for them.
And also a contributor in Islands in the Sky.
That's right. He's a part of that as well.
Yeah, and Jeff Lemire just came out with a beautiful memoir, 10,000 Ink Stains.
Oh.
It's on my to-read pile, and I know it's going to be good. Yeah.
Even though I wasn't asked that question.
What are you reading now?
I'm going to, in a very self-serving way for Cleveland, recommend Tessa Hall's Feeding Ghosts as an astonishing graphic novel, graphic narrative. Also fulfilling all of the themes that we brought up tonight of place and home and identity and love and family and so many themes. And she'll be coming to the Annisfield Book Award ceremony. She won the Pulitzer. She won the Annisfield Book Award, and I just can't praise it more. And I don't often praise things as exquisite as that. So, yeah.
I'll just, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but I'll break the news anyway. She's probably going to be in conversation with Maxine Hong Kingston on September 20th. So, I'm going to get in trouble, but I'm going to do it. Also, to be Amazon for one more second, Jeff Lemire, Gideon Falls. I highly recommend that one as well. Yeah. All right, audience Q&A. Who wants to go first? I saw your hand first, then you'll go second. I'll leave it on. I don't need it.
I don't need a mic.
Oh, okay.
I'm glad you're out. Don't worry. So me and my friend both read both of your kind of educational books. We read March and Boxes and Saints. Ninth grade, because our English teacher thinks comics are a great way to spread information, right? Especially Boxes and Saints, also March, has such a creative ingenuity to it. We were talking about how do you get that creativity of proposing to a senator that comic books are the way to tell the story of the civil rights movement, or even for Boxes and Saints, seeing historical characters because the main character is high. Like, how do you go to a place where you can think of those ideas?
I mean, for Boxes and Saints specifically, Boxes and Saints is a 2-volume graphic novel that I put out in 2012 about the Box Rebellion, which is this war that was fought on Chinese soil in the year 1900. And really that came out of just reading a lot. Like, I read a lot about the Box Rebellion. The more I read about it, the more fascinated I became with it. And also the more ambivalent I began to feel about it. The reason why it's in 2 volumes is that I couldn't decide which side of the war was the good guys. So the protagonists in one volume are actually the antagonists in the other. And that's my answer to you. I think sometimes, like, just reading a lot and not reading passively, but reading in a way where you're actually arguing with what you're reading is a way to get ideas to come out.
Okay, I have to confess something. Boxers and Saints was so creative, and it came out the same year as one of the March books. I was so jealous of you. Like, I would see it and be like, yeah. No, for real, until I got to know you, like, I mean, it wasn't like any sort of like disrespect, and it was just like, it's so good, you know? And like, here I'd shot my shot, and I'm like, you know, what, civil rights though, right? You know, and it was, and now that I look back on it, I mean, I was 29, 30, right? Like, it was more of, I didn't know the ecosystem, I didn't know the world, I didn't know I was a kid relative to y'all, right? And I was still just like, no, I'm the co-author, you know, I'm trying to earn my place in this world. And I still, to this day, feel like that is a book that deserves continued attention, both because of the history of the Boxer Rebellion, and also just because of the creative skill you brought to it.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
But also March. Like, come on, dude.
No, I mean, look, I was 24 when I got John Lewis to say yes. I just didn't know any better. I mean, that was the truth. I was like, this is an idea that would work, so you should do it. And I didn't understand that I was upending a whole political order around him, and then also like a machine in some ways that existed around all the civil rights leaders, both for kind of profit and also for control. And the idea that John Lewis would break out of the traditional publishing model of, you know, here's your 500-page prose book, brick, and go after the, like, try and reach directly to young people. It was, in some ways, both, I didn't know better, it was deeply traumatic after pulling it off, because it was so disorienting to the status quo and to the establishment. But then now, there's this moment last night after the screening, this young man, I mean, he must have been 10, 11 years old, he comes up to me, just deadpan, like no emotion on his face. He says, I had to read March for my English class. Will you take a selfie with me so I can get extra credit? I was like, heck yeah, man, saddle up, let's go. And that's what you do this for, right? That young man is never going to forget what was in that book. And now, you know.
And he's also going to get extra credit.
And he's going to get extra credit.
So early on, you mentioned how both of you were, when you first started writing Superman, you were writing in the New 52, which had a bunch of constraints around it, and also with kind of shorter Superman stories that were a little more simple. But my question is, do you think that because you were constrained creatively, you were able to get more engaging stories out of it?
I do think in general, constraints are a great way of bringing your own creativity out, right? Like when your brain has problems to solve, often the solutions that you come up with will lead to greater creativity. So I think in general, that's one of the benefits of writing in an established universe, like in a living universe, like the Marvel universe or the DC universe. Those constraints can often bring out creativity.
I mean, I don't really have to do, okay, the one time I got restrained, it got fixed later and I got to put my joke back in. It was like, I had this joke where Beast Boy's cooking with Cyborg, and he's like, Beast Boy, right? He's all over the place, he's super ADHD, ding, 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 right? And then Raven walks in and like freezes him midair. And they were like, actually Raven's in this other universe right now, you can't use her. I was like, nobody else has teleportation, like she's gonna levitate, you know, like in the Titans. And then they came back because I missed my deadline. Then they were like, oh, now she's not in there anymore. You can use her again. I just put the joke back in. That's really the only time. And like, yeah, I mean, so I'll let you know.
Hey you guys, so you're like incredibly deep writers who actually really plot things out and write very thoroughly, and there have been some less than tactful writing throughout comic history, say like People in a Fridge, for example, or the Clone Saga. If you guys could go back in time, each of you, and maybe change one story throughout history and kind of rewrite it to your own liking, what would you pick in terms of comic history that you guys could add your own little touch to, or maybe take out or edit throughout history to really change comic history?
I mean, I think I would bring Captain Carrot into the main DC universe.
I don't know a better one than that. I mean, Captain Carrot, keep that. Also, just cool action figure came out now. Now I'm getting it for Christmas. I didn't like that they retconned, not Bart Allen. Why am I forgetting his first name? The original Flash. No, the original. Barry Allen. I didn't like they retconned his death. I like, it was so emotional, so powerful, such a sacrifice.
But you would have let him stay dead.
Yeah.
You wanted him to stay dead.
That's, I mean, I guess I like Winter Soldier, so I'm not gonna say like you never do it. But I think sometimes like we cheapen death and people's experiences of death in superheroes by just bringing them back over and over again. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. It doesn't mean it's impossible. I just always, that was such a beautifully done story. That was one where I was like, but then I used Barry in a story, so who am I to
This is also super controversial. I might get hate for it. I'm also a Wonder Bat shipper. Right?
Woo!
Yeah, I'm a fan of that.
Alright, this is the final question. I hope it's a good one.
No pressure.
Andrew, Dean, thank you so much for being here. I'm a lifelong comics fan. I'm a huge fan of both your bars, especially the Clan. Amazing. I just want to ask, the first thing I think was like Alan Moore when he wanted to do Watchmen, he wanted to use the Charlton characters, and DC's like, no, you can't do that. So he created his own. So I was curious, like, are there, I guess, what's the benefits of like, using characters that aren't Superman? Because you can take liberties and you can, like, hey, let's, maybe they're living on Mars, or maybe, like, you can do these kind of like more outlandish stories than you would with Superman or Batman, where you have constraints. I was just curious, like, you feel like you had an opportunity, and is that something you'd like to try with a character that maybe like, let's make detective, like let's do a dark aging detective Chimp story. It's like, if you could have like an opportunity.
Dark Chimp return.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, but I was just curious what your thoughts on like those characters you can play more with.
I mean, I just got greenlit to change a tiny tweak of a power for Martian Manhunter. Which without spoiling it, it's just like it's his ability to give the human experience to someone or something else using his telekinesis. And it's a tiny, tiny, tiny shift, right? I'm like, it all makes sense. It's just we've never said he could do this, right? And I don't know. I mean, like that's the fun part, right? We get to grow the world. But this is my only experience with it, where I was like, this kind of really makes the story if I can do this. And they're like, yeah, okay. But again, I'm in a pocket universe, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is something to be said about working on a legacy character within the universe, right? That like it's like getting to play in this shared mythology. And there's something absolutely awesome about that. But then one big benefit is if you do like a Superman analog, like for instance, like Invincible. Invincible is essentially a Superman analog. You keep all the money, you know what I mean? Like in Kingsman. Sure. Kingsman was like originally started as a pitch for Nick Fury. Then you kept all the money because Marvel said no, and he made it an analog. So maybe there's something that could be said about that, right? You keep control, and then you just all the profit is yours. Like Robert Kirkman. He probably lives in a giant floating house because he's so rich right now.
Yeah, support independent comedy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We are honored to have had both of you on stage with us here tonight. Thank you for coming to Cleveland. Thank you for continuing the work that you do. Thank you also to the audience for such fine attention and lovely questions. And I think with that, we'll call it a night. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's an honor. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Can I call up all the comic sters for, as Grace Ellis called it, a yearbook photo? Before,